Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today we are going to talk about all of the books that I read last month, and man did we have a incredible start to 2026. I read a genre that I almost never read. I read a new book in a series that I haven't continued since literally over a decade ago. I continued more of the Discworld. We just had a great month overall, and I'm really excited to finally sit down and tell you guys about it. I will say that January did feel like a very long month, but there were a lot of great things that happened this first month of the year, and you know, it's never a dull moment over here. And I do want to take a super brief moment to thank you all so much, everybody who commented and showed support on my video about my health update and just everything that's been going on in my life that I posted a little while ago. I just want to say a huge thank you to you guys for being the best, most supportive and understanding audience ever, and I really can't tell you how grateful I am to have you guys and to have your support. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And with no further ado, let's get into the books. So, first finished book of 2026 was Midnight Tides by Steven Erikson. This is book 5 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which means that I have officially completed half the series, which has been a long time coming. You guys know that I have been reading Malazan since time immemorial, and that it took me literally 12 or so years, 13 years, maybe more, to finally get to book 5. But we're here now. We officially did it. And I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for my thoughts on this book. I've tried to keep it pretty quiet until I got a chance to get here and just share all of my thoughts. And I really debated on whether or not I wanted to do a dedicated review video for this, which I may still do if there's enough interest in it. But for the wrap-up's sake, let's get into Midnight Tides. So Malazan Book of the Fallen is a very vast, ambitious, complex fantasy world. And one of the things that I think the fandom sometimes does as a disservice to the series is we're really good at scaring people away from reading these books, which I honestly don't think is fair. Is this a complex fantasy series? Yes, absolutely. Nobody's arguing that. However, I do think it's best to just encourage people to try 1 or 2 books in the series, see how they feel about it, and just let them have their own experience. So with that little soapbox out of the way, Midnight Tides had some moments in it that really have stuck with me a month later, that are still burned into my skull. Some for good reasons, some for not so great reason. Now, I don't want to end on a bad note, so we're going to start with those things first. I was feeling whiplash with Midnight Tides, if I'm being totally honest. The different POVs, the different sides of the conflict that takes place within this book are such vastly different tones. And on the surface level, that sounds like it would make total sense. And in some ways it does. One of them I just did not jive with. I didn't like it, and I felt yanked out of the book every time it happened. And the characters in that side of the conflict are often fan favorites, and I found myself really underwhelmed by them, if I'm being totally honest. And I know that all of their fans are going to be really upset by that. But I just didn't enjoy the POVs. I didn't love the humor in this book, especially on that side of the conflict. And I felt myself just constantly kind of dragging myself through some of these scenes. Now, on the other side of the conflict, we have a completely, again, different tone, different characters. And for the most part, especially in the beginning, I was so locked and loaded, you guys. I was so hooked. I was so intrigued by the dynamics of the family that's kind of at the forefront of this story. And I'm being very spoiler-free intentionally, and I realize that for those of you that have read this book, that might be a little frustrating, but this is a 5th book in a series, so I have to be a little conscientious of that. I found myself frustrated by this book more often than I was loving it. And that's kind of the bottom line, I think. And there were some scenes in here that made me sit up, pay attention, and go, that's Malazan. That's the Malazan that I'm here for, that I love. There's some fantastic scenes in this book, some absolutely brilliant scenes. And Erikson is still an amazing writer. His prose is super just... It's the kind of prose that makes you want to sit down and just like ponder how he puts things together. And I love that about it. I really love that about this series. That being said, I'm now going over to the good things because I'm trying to avoid talking about the bad things. I had a real issue with the way that the female characters were treated in this book. And that frustrates me more even than it normally would, because I know that Erikson is better than he wrote the female characters in this book. And I'm sure that it was full of intentionality. I don't doubt that at all. And I didn't find it gratuitous. And I want to say that right away. I didn't find it wasn't something that I felt like he was writing these things in order to get shock value out of it or anything like that. But I found the treatment of the female characters in this book could be put into two different categories. One, the women are victims of sexual violence. And two, they are so hypersexualized that they're like absolutely insufferable. And that was kind of the two options through pretty much the entire story, with a couple very minor exceptions. And that really frustrated me. And I don't doubt that Erikson was telling a very intentional story, and I do not think it was gratuitous. I do, however, think that it was mishandled in several areas. And there were a couple of points in this where I almost DNF'd the entire series because of the direction he took with a couple of these characters. And it really frustrates me because I have seen him handle these topics in such an incredibly powerful way back in Dead House Gates. That's why I always tell people Dead House Gates is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, fantasy book of all time. So I know that he's so good at handling tough topics like that in a way that really is a good perspective. It's responsible, and it really delves deeply into the heart of the experience of these characters. And I think that that's so powerful. This one, there were moments that hinted at that kind of handling of the issues, but others that just completely broke my immersion, that made me so frustrated, you guys, so frustrated. And I just I hate to say this, I got bored. I got bored in several sections of this book where I really had to push myself to get through it. And what concerns me a little bit about that, and I'm just being totally honest with you guys because that's what I've promised to do, it made me really concerned for the rest of the series, honestly, because this is one of the books that everybody says is the most like fast-paced, it's the most cohesive, it's the most whatever, and insert qualifier here. And I don't know. I didn't love this as much as I really wanted to. I gave it 3 stars, and I really, really debated hard on my rating for this. And again, there were things in it that I loved, and I don't want to downplay that those were there. But overall, I was disappointed. I was disappointed in this book. And I don't know what a reread would do. I don't see myself rereading this in the near future, just because we still had a lot of Malazan to get through, and I'm still planning on continuing the series. This hasn't changed my desire to finish Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I have also heard from a lot of people that The Bone Hunters, which is the next book in the series, is another very big favorite, and I might jive with that one way better than I did with this one. So anyways, I wish that I had better news for you guys who have been waiting for me to read this book for a really long time. But it is what it is. I didn't love it. I honestly can't even tell you a single character in this book that I would add to my favorites list, and that shocks me. I will say, okay, here's one super positive thing I want to say about it, because it just reoccurred to me. I love the prologue of this book. It is probably one of my favorite prologues I've read in the series so far. It is brilliant. It deals with the larger lore of the world. And there was a reveal toward the end of the book too that kind of dealt with that wider lore that the longer I've thought about it, the more I'm like, that's really cool. So I do want to say that about it because that prologue was phenomenal. And I have heard that from a lot of people that love this book. So yeah, that is my Midnight Tides opinion. I wish it was less frustrated, but it is what it is. After Midnight Tides, I needed a complete brain reset, so I went for something completely different, and I picked up Sweet Bean Paste by Dorian Sukugawa. This is a translated Japanese fiction book about a young man who's working at a dorayaki shop, which I didn't know what dorayaki were until I read this book, and I actually bought some and tried some, and they're absolutely incredible. They're basically little tiny pancakes with like a sweet red bean paste in the middle, and they're so good, you guys. They're so good. But this young man has been working in this shop of a family that he's known for a long time, and he's kind of beholden to them in some ways. And he's working by himself, and he doesn't really have a great outlook on life. He's very down on his luck, and he's kind of causing a lot of his own problems. And after a little while, an old woman shows up and starts talking to him at the shop and tries to convince him to let her help him make the sweet bean paste, which she has a lot of experience with. But there's something a little different about this old woman, and as we get through the story, we uncover more and more of her experience and her secret that she is keeping, and it's a really beautiful little story. The beginning was a little slow for me, and it did take me a little bit to get hooked. The thing that really got me about this book wasn't even just the day-to-day story of the characters. It was, as we went through the book, it slowly revealed the experience of someone with Hansen's disease or leprosy. And despite having a cure at a certain point in history, in modern history, that people with that disease were still pretty horrifically treated and ostracized and isolated. And it was something that I had never known or really considered or read about, anything to do with that side of history, and especially not in Japan. And I just thought that it was really well done. It was very moving, and it was very engaging. I thought that the author did a fantastic job of presenting a story, a very human story of someone dealing with this stigma in a way that really has sat with me long after I finished the book. After that, I still wasn't ready to go back to fantasy, so I picked up A Death in Tokyo by Kago Higashino. This is the third translated book in his Detective Kaga series. It isn't number 3. There's a whole bunch of this series that hasn't been translated yet, so I'm really hoping we get more of them. But it's the third out of 4 that have been translated so far. So something I love about Detective Kaga is just how unobtrusive he is as a character. Higashino really sets a stage and gets us into the lives of these characters, whether they're suspects or witnesses or people related to the suspects and witnesses, and we really are brought into the community of every single book that I've read by him so far. This one deals with the murder of a middle-aged father and all of the things that unravel as the detectives are trying to discover what happened to this man and why his murder isn't the way that it appears to be on the surface. And it was really good. I still enjoyed it. It was super bingeable. I can get through one of these very, very quickly, which I love. It wasn't my favorite of the 3. I'd say it's probably 3rd out of 3 for me. I still like Newcomer the best. I was so glad to be back with Higashino's writing again, and it was such a nice, just kind of brain break after the really big heavy fantasy novel to binge through a murder mystery and enjoy the character-driven way that Higashino presents his stories. I absolutely love it. So, I finished this one, and again, wasn't my favorite of his, but I still enjoyed the ride. My patron pick for this month was a book that I read a little bit every day from January 1st to January 15th. And this is a genre that I don't dip into hardly ever. So I was a little bit nervous about how I was gonna find the book, how I was gonna enjoy it, if I was gonna be able to get through it, or if it was gonna be a drag. And thankfully, it was none of those things. That is The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. This is probably one of the most lauded short stories on BookTube in my general vicinity. The Paper Menagerie, the titular short story in this collection, people have talked about this so much since I started BookTube and just praised it so heavily. And I have to say, I went into this waiting, kind of wanting to just get to The Paper Menagerie, and I think it's number 7 or 8, so you do have to read several stories before you get to it. It's kind of in the middle. I was so impressed by this short story collection, you guys. There's so much variety. We get everything from sci-fi space stories to ancient Chinese folklore, and just, there's such a wide variety. And somehow Ken Liu manages to just punch you right in the heart over and over and over again. He's so good at that, you guys. There are several stories in here that had me literally bawling my eyes out. There are at least 2, probably 3 of those. And several more that had me emotional at the reveals, at the plight of the characters. It's wild how much range is in this book. And I think that while I do agree that The Paper Menagerie is an incredible short story and deserves all of the accolades that it has gotten, it's actually not my favorite in this book. I have a couple other ones that I would absolutely place higher than that one. For those of you that have read it, The Literomancer is probably my favorite story in here. Mono no Aware is the other one. They're just mind-blowingly good. Like, this man can craft a short story, you guys. I loved the experience of reading this book. I absolutely loved it. I was mentally taking notes because writing a good short story is not easy. It's very difficult to engage your reader, get them emotionally invested, and tell a somewhat complete story or a engaging story in such a short amount of space. And Ken Liu is very, very good at it. So highly recommend Paper Menagerie. And for those of you that have only read Paper Menagerie, because I know you're out there, please go back and read the rest of these stories, because I think that this collection is absolutely brilliant and deserves a full read. Next up, I finished another Discworld book. This is Soul Music by Terry Pratchett. Music with rocks in has invaded the Discworld and chaos reigns supreme. This book, you guys, first of all, I listened to the audiobook mostly for this, and Sean Clifford is a brilliant narrator. I absolutely loved her narration of this book. You can tell that Pratchett just had an absolute heyday with the puns and the subtle references to different rock bands, and, somehow kind of tearing apart the veil between our world and the Discworld, and our rock music has flooded in and caused chaos. And it was fun. This was a really fun book. It surprised me a little bit because within the death cycle of Discworld, this one doesn't get talked about that much. And I would say out of the 3 I've finished so far, it's actually probably my favorite. There were still a couple things that I didn't love about it, but overall, it also introduced a character that just has shot to the top of my favorites list. Obviously, death is always fabulous in these books. Also, the death of rats, incredibly fabulous. But Susan, I was introduced to Susan in this book, and Susan is an absolute emo delight, and I want to adopt her, which she would hate. But this is such a good book, you guys. I was really surprised at how much I loved this. My journey through the death cycle continues. I now have 2 more books to go before that sub-series is finished. The other thing that I've been loving about the death cycle books, and I'm sure it's going to happen all over in the other books of the Discworld, is the subtle references to characters from the City Watch. Anytime one of them kind of passes through the background, I just get so excited. I get so excited. And yeah, it's just delightful. I'm absolutely loving my time in the Discworld so far, and I had a great time with Soul Music. Last but not least, I read The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. This was my book club pick for our book club with myself, my husband, and two of our really close friends from college. We meet in person every few months to discuss one of our book, movie, and music picks. And we just have a great time with it. And The Diamond Eye was what I picked for January. This is the story of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who was a Russian sniper back in the World War II era. She was a student, she was a young mother, and she became a sniper who had a crazy tally of kills by the end of the war and became kind of a Soviet poster child on an American tour asking for American aid to the Soviets against the Nazis. Her story is just so incredibly fascinating, you guys. It's mind-blowing what she went through, how good she was, and yet remained very human, and kind of subverted the expectations that I think a lot of people would have about someone who is a wartime sniper. The historical fiction aspect of this, I think Kate Quinn is a really good writer. She's very engaging, she tells an engrossing story, and I was very hooked, and I didn't want to put the book down. So in that sense, I think she's a really excellent writer. I know that this is historical fiction, but I felt like the parts of the book that were more rooted in reality and Lyudmila's actual memoir and the historical accounts of what actually happened were the highlight. The parts of this book where Kate Quinn started to veer into fiction and just kind of making her own stuff up is really where I got frustrated with this book, because it became very sensationalized, very Hollywoodized. The ending of this really frustrated me a lot. There's a character that she kind of like ties some things together to create this character in the story who becomes kind of a main cast member that I didn't mind, and he actually was my favorite character in the book. But the ending and just there was some liberties taken with this that bothered me, that I think, and this is a conversation where it's like, okay, how far can historical fiction push real historical characters and still honor the original story? And I think this book does a really good job in a lot of aspects. I really do. And there are other aspects, like the ending, that I just felt like weren't necessary, and they completely changed the tone and the reverence of the story to the original character, if that makes sense. We had a great discussion on this. I still found Pavlichenko's story to be incredibly fascinating, and I want to dig into her historical account more. I know she has a memoir, and there's other historical accounts about her life that I really would like to check out. So overall, I'm really glad I read this, because it introduced me to another incredible female historical figure that I didn't know about before reading this book, and I really appreciated it for that. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to digging into her story a little bit more outside of historical fiction. All right, you guys, that is everything that I read in January, and the book of the month is gonna go to The Paper Menagerie. This is hands down, it's not that I've read a lot of short story collections, but this one has set a bar. This one has set a tall bar for anything I read after this, because it's fantastic. And I absolutely loved so many of the stories in here. There were a few that I didn't love as much, but really, overall, the average rating for all of these stories is insanely high for me. So, very excited that I got to read this. Thank you to my patrons for voting on this as our pick for January. Check out the links in the description box below to all of my social media accounts, my Patreon, and my website, where you can check out my fantasy books if you are interested in giving those a try. And I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope you are reading some 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.